So hey guys, my name is Dan. I am the new vice president of the OSIG, Orthopedic Surgery Interest Group. Um, and so today we're going to give sort of a panel. We're lucky, really fortunate enough to have a few great speakers today who are going to talk about their research uh, experience in ortho when they took a fellowship year. Four of our panelists took a fellowship year, and then one of our panelists decided not to take a fellowship year. So I'll just be talking about their experiences, the pros and cons of taking a research fellowship year, um, and what they would have liked to have known going into it. So we could hopefully provide you guys with better information going into it. So today's agenda, we'll have individual panelists share their stories, and afterwards we'll go into sort of a Q&A open forum where you guys can ask any questions that you might have. So here are our panelists. We have John from RWJ, who's currently doing his fellowship at Johns Hopkins as the Pogge Fellow there. And then we have Christina, who's an M4 here. She took no research years, so it'll be nice to hear her perspective on why she decided to do that and whatnot. And then we have Joe, who took his research year at HSS, current M4 here. Joe and I were actually friends last year because I was actually fortunate enough to be his coworker at HSS. So it'd be cool to hear his opinion of work in the city. And then we have Narina, who is a research fellow at Rothman, who's now an M4 at RWJ. And so great to hear her perspective. And then we have Rosa from NJMS, who is an M4 there, and she took her research fellowship year at NJMS. So I don't know if we have any NJMS students on the call, but we extend the invite to them. So hopefully they could join us this evening. So we'll start off with John.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Should I just tell you like next slide when I want you to kind of like advance?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. So as Dan kindly introduced me, my name's John. I'm an M4 at Robert Wood. Next slide. So I'm just going to like jump into this. I definitely think my situation was a little bit unique in that once I kind of committed to ortho pretty early on in my M1 year, I think I was fortunate enough to have like very good mentors who I met through kind of cold emailing through the kind of Robert Wood alumni Excel spreadsheet, as I kind of put on the slides here. And I think it was through their influence and kind of them talking about their various experiences, taking a year out for various programs, that I kind of knew right away that I was pretty intent on pursuing the path of doing this in the middle of my medical school education. As I kind of listed at the bottom, Brendan Striano, class of 18 at Robert Wood, currently a Stein Fellow at MGH, Amar Taufik, a second year at Long Island Jewish, and Brian Bueno, an intern at NYU Langone. They were all like pretty instrumental in kind of like really pursuing and kind of allowing me to feel confident pursuing the path. So I kind of geared my app pretty early on to being competitive for a number of like these more formal fellowships at a number of institutions. And Brendan kind of made me aware of ones that he thought I should kind of eye pretty early on. So that's kind of how I like spent the first two and a half years of med school, mainly just kind of like trying to bolster my research, really get involved and have a few faculty mentors at Robert Wood who I was able to kind of form these closer relationships with. And another reason why I was kind of interested in the year out to start was kind of my interest in academics and clinical research. So obviously taking a year out to do that was, a pretty good move on my end. You can go to the next slide. So the research ERAS process is definitely like a little bit less formal than ERAS, for example. And I'm sure Christina could probably talk more about ERAS because she's going through it right now. And I don't know the specifics of it quite as much. But I would say late summer, early fall, leading into my M3 year, I was already aware of the programs I was interested in. I applied to 8 or 9. I got offers from 6. But I kind of had my eye on POGI and probably 1 or 2 other programs really, really early on. I interviewed for POGI in February in the middle of my 3rd year, got the offer in late February and immediately dropped everything else. And I can kind of go more into why I was like really interested in POGI really early on and kind of what I saw in it with regards to value and what I wanted to get out of my research here. You can go to the next slide. So just for some context, I think people pursue research years for a number of different reasons. Some people kind of do it because they felt they were lacking in their clinical research, kind of going into their 3rd year and, heading into the app cycle. And obviously that's stressful. And I don't think there's any magic number of publications, whether or not, it's like 50 or 0. I think you can match at a very competitive program regardless of your output. Same goes for STEP, goes for clinical grades. And I'll let, again, Christina talk more about that because she's on the call and going through all of that right now. But just for context, I had, I think, 11 or 12 publications right when I started my research year, and about 9 or 10 published abstracts. 2 or 3 of them were posters at national conferences. And when I was applying, I had like about 4 publications and 4 to 5 abstracts, but 7 or 8 were submitted and pending acceptance. So that's kind of like what I applied to a few of these formal fellowships with. So, for lack of better words, I wasn't really concerned about output in my research year. I definitely wanted to get some significant work out there and have the opportunity to go to a place where I might impact clinical practice with some of the projects and working with people that are a little bit bigger in the field. And I felt as if I would have a really good opportunity to do that if I grinded away my first 2.5 years of med school to kind of get the basis of what it's like to contribute to a project in a number of various roles. And fortunately, I've been in a situation where I can now do that. But I just wanted to give some context in terms of where I was with research. You can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to like outline a typical day as a POGI fellow for me, because I think it's a rather unique research year experience, and I definitely don't think it's a run-of-the-mill research year. So, it's a little bit more clinical in nature. So we're getting in at around 5:30. We're running the list with the Peds Ortho team. There's 2 of us. There's 3 Hopkins residents. There's a Maryland resident and a Union Memorial resident. Right after we run the list, there's education for about 45 minutes. And these are lectures either given by attendings or residents on a number of topics in Peds Ortho, because the POGI Fellowship is more or less you acting as an unofficial sub-I for an entire year on the Peds Ortho service under the tutelage of Dr. Sponseller, who's my main mentor for the year. So then you have like an education for about 45 minutes on things like myelomeningeal seal or clubfoot or, adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, which is really helpful for just establishing your roots in Peds Ortho. 6:45 to 7 is boards. We hear overnight consults, and that's helpful for just kind of getting your overall clinical kind of vignette in and getting used to what it's like to kind of see what a consult is like, see how to take a consult, see how to manage things overnight. We round for about 30 minutes, and then from 7:30 to the end of the day, I'm either in the OR in clinic or I have a dedicated research day. Once a week, we have a 30-minute meeting with Dr. Sponseller, me and my co-fellow. We split 15 minutes apiece just so we can kind of adequately, track our progress over the course of the year. Because as I kind of just outlined to you, it doesn't really seem like it's research centered, if that makes any sense. I think that the thing that's unique about this program is that it's a little bit more clinical in nature, which works in my favor because I definitely, at the end of the day, still want to be an orthopedic surgeon, not just doing research. So this works in my favor. But obviously, like, it's a little bit different in that we're not spending all our time just pumping out manuscripts and submitting to journals, which, can be good or bad depending on what you want to get out of the year. And as I kind of said at the bottom, it's not a traditional research year. It's definitely not what the vast majority of people do in a research year. But for me, it ended up working for my situation. And as I kind of said at the bottom, we're going to grand rounds every, month or so. There's journal clubs every month and a lot of social events. So it's a great opportunity to work with and meet residents in a variety of settings. You can go to the next slide. Research focus, Dr. Sponseller's research focuses are my research focuses. So he does a lot of stuff with AIS, neuromuscular scoliosis. And I'm doing a few projects in skeletal dysplasia patients, so like achondroplasia, chondrodysplasia, et cetera. He has a lot of zebras in his clinic. So I think a unique part is that I'm going to see patients with like Goldenhar syndrome or Ellis-Van Creveld and a bunch of things that I've just never heard of, which is really helpful just for my overall exposure as a student, especially in this learning phase. And I think that seeing these patients in clinic and seeing how they're managed and seeing what we can do for them as students, I think that that's really unique in just kind of teaching us how we can manage these patients and helping us come up with research ideas. You can go to the next slide. So to kind of like quickly wrap up, pros, great alumni network, incredible network mentorship, robust clinical exposure. I will say that like what Dr. Sponseller allows me to do in the OR is more than I've ever done in any setting as a third year. Most cases I'm first assist, and it's really, really helpful for just kind of seeing the perspective of how to help in, a very, helpful way leading into sub-Is and all that. There's ample research opportunities if you want to kind of make it more research focused. Lots of opportunities to collaborate with a number of different research fellows, not only here, but at other institutions. We have a dedicated research coordinator who's incredible, helps us with all of our IRBs, tracking and finishing them, helps us with the project, helps us come up with ideas, which is really, really helpful and, helps speed things along, especially with submission. And for me, the most important thing was kind of a great track record of matching as seen on our website. I think that POGI and probably a number of others that I can count on one hand directly publish where their fellows match each year. And we have 100% of a match rate, which was obviously pretty influential in helping me choose this, just in that it seems as if it's a safe bet to take a year out for something that seems so established at matching at a number of great institutions, Hopkins included. For cons, I think it's high stakes. It's set up like a year-long sub-I. If you're unlikable and you make a bad impression with a resident, that can potentially really stab you in the back. And that's something you not want to do. You're delaying your earning potential for a year. And as many people have student loans, that can definitely act as a little bit of a deterrent, especially if you're trying to rush, get into residency and finish. I'm not graduating with my original class. I have a lot of good friends there, and obviously kind of leaving them to kind of do something on my own is a little bit scary. And that was something I considered as well. And my program is slightly less productive. If I were to go to perhaps like NYU or Rothman, for example, I could probably finish with 60 or 70 publications in a given year. And that's really impressive. And it'll probably really, really look good on the CV. But for me, that wasn't really what I was looking for in a research year. So I kind of like opted for more of a clinical research year, and it worked out for me. But I think those are some of the pros and cons. You can go to the next slide. But yeah, there's more information about the Poggi Fellowship at the link there. I put my number and my email there. If anyone wants to ask questions about my fellowship or research years in general, and you have a number of great other panelists on this call who I'm sure would be more than willing to kind of talk about their various experiences. But yeah, thanks for your time, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And we'll put your contact information in the chat as well. Thank you for that. Okay, so next up we got Christina.
All right, so my presentation I think is a little briefer because I'm the odd one out who didn't take a research year here. So to give you context, I'm going to tell you exactly like my research, the amount, and like the match data. And basically my backstory though is also different. I had a 3-year master's, so I knew I didn't want to take any extra time prior to residency. That was just my personal background. I think, you know, already having done 3 years I did a nutrition master's, to take that extra year for me just seemed like too much. And we have really good match rates from our school in orthopedics. And so I took all that into account and did the same thing John did. I called a bunch of people, and I cannot stress enough, like the network that we have here with both residents and alumni is so incredible. And I think also a part of that is calling people that you can trust. So if you've already spoken to some people, I know there's a lot of M2s on this call, and if you start making relationships with people, they will tell you honestly the position you're in. And that's really important to me, is that you can call up people and they'll say, they'll give you kind of wishy-washy answer. But I had people that I knew would actually look at my resume and actually look at my application as a whole, because that's what you have to remember, is that research is only one part of it. And one problem I think is that too many people right now are saying, well, because step 1 is pass fail, I should do a research year. And it's not an equivocal thing at all. Doing a research year does not set you apart if you don't have really strong reasons to do it. So I think you'll hear from everyone on this call what their specific reasons were. And I think that's really valuable. And you definitely should not be doing a research year just to strengthen your application, because your application needs to reflect who you are as a person as a whole. So numbers wise, because everyone's always curious about that, I don't have a ton of research. At the time I applied for residency application, so when I submitted ERAS, which is in the end of September of your M4 year, I had 2 published papers and I was not first author. I had 3 projects in the process of publication. So that's one thing that's great to note, is that when you apply on ERAS, you could put projects that are currently submitted or that are awaiting review. And that those projects, I think uniquely were first author. So I had a really strong role in those. I had 1 published abstract and then 3 presentations that I wasn't presenting author. So I didn't have an empty research experience, and numbers wise, this adds up to, what is this? 9 things on there. But if you look at the match data, you'll see like percentiles of number of research experiences. And these are going to change, because one thing that changed this year is that you can only list 10 total experiences on ERAS. As opposed to the year before mine, you can list as many experiences as you want. So you see that the average, I fall in the, for number of experiences, if you were to count all these up, like below the 75th percentile, and then number of abstracts and presentations, like I fall below the 50th percentile. So my numbers are not incredible. You can go to the next slide. But I think one reason you want to consider not doing a research year is if you already have published research and you have active research ongoing, like the position I was in, and that the quality of your research is more than the quantity. So the numbers game doesn't really matter when you're on the interview trail. They're going to ask you about 1 or 2 projects that you're really passionate about. And if you could speak strongly about them, I think that's really what matters. So for me, the projects that I've been first author on, I'm able to talk about from start to finish. I'm able to speak intelligently about them. It's more than just being on a ton of papers. I think John spoke about this, about, you could be at somewhere where you have 50 or 60 publications, but if you can't really speak to them, it's really not helpful. And then again, reinforcing the fact that research is only one facet of your application, and that if you have really strong clerkship grades and you're honoring, you have good mentorship relationships, you have good other experiences that show you as a student as a whole, is really important. So because everyone in this field is going to have some research, and it's definitely not an arms race. And I did well with interviews without having a ton of publications. I mean, obviously I haven't matched yet, so I really can't like be 100% confident about anything. But I think what you cannot undervalue is these mentorship relationships, because your letters of rec, I think, actually are going to matter the most. And that is one really great thing that you get out of a research year, I think, is getting someone who potentially is going to write you a really strong letter of recommendation because you've worked with them closely for a year. But at that same time, I think my letters actually played a huge part in the interviews that I did get. You could go to the next slide. And so how should you decide? I mean, you're going to hear from a lot of people with different perspectives tonight, but I think reach out to people you trust. I spoke about this. So you want to speak to attendings that are actually part of the application review process. So one thing I didn't realize is that we have lots of connections, but attendings might work with residents, but they may not be on the residency selection committee. So they're not really sure what goes into that process. So you want to, I think, first reach out to residents and ask them, is there, can I speak to this attending that's part of the process, and someone who will really be honest with you. Additionally, like I spoke with mentors at other institutions that said, if we know your school, we know you're not Rothman, and that you don't have all of the means to publish, 20 papers as an average medical student. So any research coming from Rutgers, we know that you put the work in. So I think that's one benefit of that. If you're trying to stay in the Northeast, they do know our program, and the reputation of our program holds really strong, that we are really hardworking students. And you want to also have your application ready when you're going to reach out to mentors. You don't want to be like, hey, I have, 2 projects ongoing. Do you think I should take a research year? Have your whole story ready so they're able to holistically say, well, you have not a lot of research, but your grades are really good, and I see that you're the president of this society. And, those are all things that are going to be highlighted in the residency interview process. And then think about your story. So what makes you different? Because at the end of the day, they don't choose interviewees based on, they don't go by number of publications and kind of go from there and choose their interviewees. They really want to interview people that they're interested in talking to, and that has strong letters of recommendation. Obviously, if you're a good student, you have to check all those boxes, and being involved in any research will kind of get you in the door. So I really think that's important. And then another thing that there'll be other panels on, and you could talk to any of the M4s, I think, about this, is choosing your ways. So if you want to go to a research heavy institution like Harvard, HSS, Rush, any of these places where they pump out a ton of research, you should heavily consider doing an away there as a person who hasn't done a research year, because that will be your opportunity to then stand out and show them that you are hardworking, instead of getting filtered out just because of demographics or geographics, because you don't have strong research. So that, I think, you should seriously consider. Geographics plays a huge role in the residency process. So if you want to like unlock a region, think about that. And also that your September and October away, you will likely not get a letter from, so it won't be on your application, so people won't see that you went there. So it does help you make an impression somewhere, and I think that's really valuable, but it's something you need to consider. So I think ultimately, like in the M1, M2 position, you really want to think about your story and say, do I have a strong story that I do some research, but it's okay that I don't have to take a year? And think about yourself as a whole, as an applicant. And I'll put my info in the chat. Anyone can reach out to me with any questions, but that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was awesome. Thank you. Okay, next up we have Joe.
What's up, guys? Joe Hawes, M4 at Rutgers. Next slide. Yeah, so a little bit about myself. Undergrad at Howard University, graduated in 2019. Went on straight to medical school, which kind of helped influence my decision to take a research year. I was still young, so I was like, why not? What's a year? Was involved with 2 projects my second year that weren't. I was still kind of not sure where they were going to end up and how they were progressing. So at that time when I was about to turn like halfway through M3 year, I still had 0 publications. So that really helped me to decide to take a research year. Step 1 also changed to pass fail. So I was originally in the class of 23. So it was a transitional year where step was pass fail. What were they going to do about step 2? About research, there's going to be more emphasis on research. So a lot of questions that were kind of up in the air. And then kind of a fun fact that I found that there is an increasing number of ortho applicants that are taking research year. So the number that I found was about 11 to 17% that take a research year. Next slide. So as Dan said, I worked at HSS, the Adult Reconstruction Joint Replacement Service, under the direction of Dr. Haas, who's the chief of knee service. Which means I basically worked for everybody that was on joint service. I was a research coordinator, which meant I had a little bit more responsibility and a little bit more leeway in the projects that I could handle. I worked with biomechanics, I worked with hip, I worked with knee, I worked with CRGC, which is the Complex Joint Reconstruction Service. So basically all the revisions. So there was prospective studies, there was retrospective studies. I kind of had my hands on a bit of everything. One thing I do suggest is do not, if you're using the research year not to go into research, try not to go on to prospective studies. They are hard, they take a long time. You won't get your name on them, I promise you. Because in order to have good data, quality data, it takes years. So a lot of my time was on one study about a specific hip implant, and they were looking at 10-year outcomes, and the patients were there for follow-up for 2 years. So I was like kind of wasting my time with those patients, just kind of going through it, but it's part of my job. So just be mindful if you do go into these research years, try to get on as many retrospective studies as you can or case studies, because they'll be the most efficient and productive projects. Next slide. So the biggest benefits that I found working at HSS was the networking. Dr. Haas actually was one of the creators of the Journey 2 and Genesis knee. He actually gets royalties on every knee implanted in the entire country. So this man's check is like, I don't know, 10 million a quarter. So he has like a very, very vast network, which was very helpful. And then funny enough, when I was actually onboarding, I ran into one of the surgeons who was actually coming back. He just finished up working. He started at Cedars-Sinai, then came to HSS for a fellowship, went back to Cedars, and then they basically recruited him back. So we like ran into each other doing our health screening. And I was like, hey, funny enough, I'll actually be working with you. Like, let's get on some projects together. So fast forward to when I was applying for away rotations, one of my friends goes to Cedars, and they actually ended up cold calling him. Like I submitted my application, they ended up calling him, and then he like texted me. He's like, "Hey, they called me, said great things about you. Hopefully it goes well." So the network is just like, you never know, like John was saying, then like make a good impression, because you never know when it will either help you or hurt you, because it's like you have one time shot. Even when I went to Academy, Dr. Haas was there and he was talking to attendings, and he would just randomly bring me over to chat with other attendings. So definitely that. Then since it would be most ideally between your 3rd and 4th year, education is huge. So HSS, they did weekly conferences on grand rounds were on Thursdays, and then Tuesdays there was like a resident run kind of case study where they bring a patient in, do an examination. Attendings would talk whether or not they believed that they needed surgery and kind of plan their replacement. So I think I learned an incredible amount. Even when I came back for my home sub-I at Robert Wood, I was on joint service, and I was getting the questions right that the residents didn't know, because joints is something that's kind of a niche. So it's very helpful if you find something peds. I was also on some peds projects at HSS. So little different things. If you just kind of cast your net out, there's things you can talk about later down the road that will be impressive and kind of make you stand out. And then the biggest thing is the time off. I also scheduled my third year incredibly like wrong. I started with IM, then I did OB, then I did surgery. So I just like smacked myself in the face and was like burnt out by like month, 5. So during my time off, I really took advantage. You have weekends off, like you go home from work, you might have some work to do, but you can do it on the weekend. It's not pressing, like there's no test on Friday. Like you can take your time, do what you need to do, and just really enjoy your time. So next slide. So these are some of the academic things that I did. The Holiday Hip and Knee course is run by HSS. Dr. Haas runs that. It happens every year. I actually went back this year, saw all the attendings, was great. They all always checking in. In the middle, I was able to scrub into some cases. This was with one of my friends, Dr. Parks. Then I went to Academy, and then top right is one of the lecture series. They have programs all the time. So people are coming in from other institutions, from Ortho Carolina, from Mayo, from Rush, from NYU. Like people are always coming in. So you never know who you might run into. But moving to the next slide. What I really enjoyed was time off. So as you see on the left one, man, Dan over there, this was actually at our Holiday Hip, or not Holiday Hip, the HSS company party. I was able to attend friends' weddings, which is like that middle one and the one that's kind of pinkish. Was able to go home for like Thanksgiving, not have to stress about a test before or after. And then I was able to do like the M&M pictures, like a museum. Like I could just go and explore New York and have a good time. So I really, really strongly suggest doing a research here if you feel like you need it. I don't think there's really a downside unless you know you're not going to be productive, because when you go and you apply, they expect you to have publications. Network is great, but if they see you have one publication, they're like, what did you do? Like you had a whole year to do something. So that doesn't mean that everything has to be published while you're there. I put, I don't know how many projects that were like ongoing. Even like some of the prospective stuff, I was like, it's still technically ongoing, so I'm gonna put that on my ERAS application. So those are just kind of things that I took into account. I think kind of echoing everything that everyone said, it really depends. Rutgers doesn't have the strongest research department. I mean, it's growing. It's better, much better than it was when I started. There was no OSIG. There was nothing. We would never have a meeting like this, which was a reason why I didn't have any papers like going into my third year. But it's really a time, if you feel like you need the time off to like decompress and then really jump into a ways refreshed, like then you go, because a ways, once you go back, it's like you go and you hit the ground running, like you're on it and you're an intern for 6 months. And so I think it's really advantageous for that. Network's great. Went to Cedars for an away rotation. I got an interview from there, even with not that many publications, not the best scores, not the best grades. Calls really matter, especially in orthopedics, especially with the changes to STEP. One of my friends actually got off the wait list just because one of the attendings knew the program director at the program and was like, hey, you should give her a look. Called like next day off the wait list. So it's networking is very, very important in such a small field. So I'll put my contact in the chat, but I think that's my last slide. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, next up we have Narina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Narina. I'm also an MS4. So just a little bit about me. I went to Rutgers in New Brunswick, and I didn't take any time off between undergrad and med school. So I went straight to Robert Wood. And that kind of was one of the deciding factors for me too, was just not having a gap in between. So between my third year and fourth year, I decided to go to Rothman in Hackensack to do 2 research years. And I'll explain a little bit more about why I decided to do 2 and how I think that affected my experience there. And then essentially for me, my fellowship was a lot more self-guided. We didn't have a lot of structure, but I feel like that was nice because I got to kind of make it what I wanted to. I worked with attendings in every single subspecialty. I worked in spine, a bunch of shoulder and elbow, hand, joints. I even got to do a little bit of peds, and I worked with neurosurgeons. It was a fantastic experience, and I met so many people through it. My personal experience was not only like developing the research projects, but pitching those ideas to attendings, completing a bunch of IRBs, enrolling patients in a bunch of different clinical trials, getting to write the actual manuscripts, and then presenting them at conferences. For me, I was able to see some patients in clinic and I could shadow in the OR. I wasn't able to scrub in as most of my attendings worked at ambulatory surgery centers. So I will say that's like a big thing that you should make sure that you can scrub in. And one of the things that I think was a downside of my personal experience. And one of my favorite parts was that I got to mentor a bunch of medical students who were interested in research projects at Hackensack, and a lot of them are residents now. So it's like very cute to see them like all actually interns. And you can go to the next slide. So just a couple pros and cons. I feel like it allowed me to personally get broader experience to orthopedics, especially because I decided very late in my 3rd year. I was COVID year, so we didn't really get to do a lot of electives. And for me, I was able to get all of that elective experience and really decide if ortho was for me. It also connected me to a bunch of mentors who, again, wrote really strong letters for me. And also, if you want an academic career, it kind of enables you to build a foundation to complete future research projects. And I think one of the things to consider is also in terms of fellowship, if you are interested in going to maybe a more research heavy institution, or you're interested in a specific fellowship, they do still look at research projects. So starting early is really important. In terms of cons that I found, one was for me was clinical skills, which I kind of call the re-entry period. If you have a mostly research oriented kind of time off, that's more, it's hard to go back, especially to the OR if you've been away from rotations for a little while. Number 2 is something I think a lot of people have mentioned, the additional year of training. But I think it's kind of how you frame your experience. If you want a more academic career versus private practice, it'll change sort of the trajectory of your career. So for me, I know that I want to do academics. I knew that I wanted more of a research career, at least some component of a research career. And not only did it introduce me to doing research, but also to mentors who were doing that as a career. And another con is that it might be unfunded if you don't apply early enough. I know when I was applying, like there were so many that were unfunded, especially in places like New York City where it's really expensive. So definitely a consideration. And then things to look for, I would say, like have previous fellows matched. For my program, there were only two fellows before me, and they had both matched to places that they had wanted to go. Another thing, funding, if they have a clinical component, and then also the type of research. So there's some that do basic science, which I know a lot of you have done in undergrad, and it takes a very long time. Clinical research, translational research, there's a variety of different kinds and combinations. And then in terms of being successful before you start your fellowship, one I would say is like to come in with a lot of ideas. If you know that your mentor in particular does, some specific niche research, I would read all of their research projects and then come up with projects that are even similar. Even if they decide not to pursue them, I think it shows a lot of really good initiative. And they might offer you like a similar related project or build on that idea. And they'll make you first author, and it's great. So I would say for that, reading current issues of journals and seeing what the hot topics are, and also like the presentations at meetings are always online. You can check them out and see what people are publishing and presenting and what makes a good abstract, good paper. Learning statistics. I know there's like an R course that I took at Rutgers earlier that's fantastic. SAS data, which are easier, like point and click systems, and Prism I really like for making graphs. And then setting up your accounts and requesting access to stuff before you start, because some of that stuff takes a really long time. And again, I'll leave my information in the chat if you guys have any questions or want to connect.
Thank you so much, Nora. All right, next up we have Rosa from NJMS.
Hi guys, I'm Rosa. I had a very different experience from everyone on this panel. So I originally came into medical school wanting to do OB-GYN. And then third year started, I also started with medicine, and I hated it. So I knew I wanted to do something surgical. Ortho was my first selective and I loved it, but I still was unsure. So I wanted to try other things and I tried a few other surgical subspecialties, but I came back to ortho. I also had a low research volume. I had about 8 items total. That's including like abstracts and posters, and none of them were related to ortho. But as Christina mentioned, research isn't everything, and I felt like I had other things on my application that set me apart. So I continued on and I did my home sub-I, took step 2, got my step 2 score back, and I didn't do amazing. It was very mediocre, and that's when I kind of stopped. And again, like everyone on this panel has mentioned, having people who are in your corner and willing to take a look at your application really matters. Dr. Vospikian is our program director, and I had worked with him on my sub-I as well as on the elective. I knew him very well. And he was able to take a look at my entire application, my personal statement, CV, and he just really sat down and had a very candid conversation with me about what I should do. Should I do the year? And ultimately, I decided to take the year. And I also had very little research knowledge. I came into med school straight out of college as well. And I unfortunately started medical school during COVID. So the opportunities for research were also very limited. And I just genuinely didn't know, like, how do you start a manuscript from beginning to end? How do you do stats? And I wanted to get a deeper foundation. You could go to the next slide. So that's a little bit about the research, that why I decided to take it. Day to day, usually Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays are dedicated research days for me. Tuesdays are usually in the OR, and Thursdays are more of an education day. So there's resident education for about 3 hours. Then I go to clinic, which is usually tumor clinic, and then tumor conference, which is where we have a pathologist, radiologist, and then our orthopedic oncology attendings, and they go through every single patient and kind of talk about them. So Thursday is really an education day for me. In terms of the OR days, like John mentioned, we get a lot of OR like exposure. I've been going to the OR and the attendings let you do so much. Again, you're basically first assist. All the residents know you. They kind of trust you on like what you say because you spend the most time with the attending, and the residents are usually just rotating through. So in terms of like clinical experience, I've had a lot of that as well. In terms of pros for the research year, the number one thing for me is learning how to do research. And as Narima just mentioned, learning how to do stats is very important. And it also helps you to kind of move papers along because a lot of people know, like have an idea and like are able to write, but stats is usually what stops you from moving forward. So definitely learning how to do research was a big pro for me. More first author publications because you have the time to actually invest in a paper and come up with the idea and see it through. And you're also able to work more closely with residents and any research projects they may have. Again, you have more time, so they're more willing to reach out. OR time was a huge pro for me. Again, being in the OR, making sure that I maintain those skills and I'm still learning. And again, attending is actually allowing you some autonomy in the OR was really nice. More networking opportunities, as everyone said, that's extremely, extremely important. During my sub-I, I made a really good impression. Again, you're basically in our school as well, you're basically on a year-long sub-I, and the residents are basically looking at how you behave. Like, are you an active member? Are you working hard? Like, exactly what are you doing? So that was also very important. And again, resident and attending FaceTime. I basically work with Dr. Beebe and Dr. Vospikian in clinic as well as in the OR, so I see them all the time. In terms of cons, like everyone mentioned, finances are the NGMS program is unfunded. For me, I live at home, so it's not that big of a burden for me. But for people who don't have that luxury or live elsewhere, it's definitely something to consider because again, you're taking an extra year. You're not it's not being funded, and those are also extra loans that you need to consider. You're delaying your graduation. As someone mentioned, you're kind of watching your friends move through the process, and you kind of like took a step back to do something else, which is like good in the sense that you're like bettering yourself, but it also sucks because you're watching your friends like move in through the process and you're no longer going to graduate with them. You also need to work. As Joe mentioned, you can't take the year and only have one project. They're going to definitely look at that. So it's definitely not a vacation, but it's much better, I feel like, than going through school. Like as he mentioned, you don't have a test every Friday or whatever that is. But you do need the research volume. And the last con I included was last shot. If you don't match, you're technically not allowed to take another research year. You can, but again, you've already taken it. In terms of what I learned, I would definitely do it again, building like these strong connections, working with people, getting your research out there, definitely being helpful. And as someone also mentioned, coming in with ideas. I spoke to a few people who had done the research year before, and they kind of told me like, hey, go on PubMed and see like what were the last papers that were published within the last 6 months? What are those topics? Because there's usually an ebb and flow to research, and there's like all these things that become popular and then it kind of dies down. So they told me go look at what has been published and come in with those ideas and probably new ideas that you can possibly work towards. And the attendings will tell you like, hey, no, like I already did that. That's been overdone. Maybe let's do this. So again, it's like a jumping board for you to start off your research year. And I'll also put my contact information in the chat.
Thank you so much, Rosa. It was great hearing your perspective from NGMS. Okay, so we're just going to open up to now to be towards an open forum. Just have any questions. I know we sent the Google form out beforehand so people could ask some questions anonymously. So I think we have those questions ready. So if anyone has any questions they want to ask right away, go ahead.
I can go ahead and ask the first question. So I know we briefly touched on it, but I'm just curious, how do you manage like applying for the research year with med school here, like with the student affairs? Like how does all that, come together that you're taking a break, you're going away to another school to do research here?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So it's just a $20 holding fee. So they give you an option. Either you can pay for tuition for that year, and then you have the $20 holding fee your 5th year, or the opposite. You just pay a $20 holding fee per semester during your research year, and then you get charged tuition your last year. It's a very easy, simple process.
And Rosa, was that the same for you at the NJMS?
Yeah, so at NJMS, there is no like holding fee or anything. You reach out to student affairs with a letter, basically stating why you want to take the research year and what you hope to gain from it. And then you also work with either your mentor or mentors to come up with a list of objectives and kind of structure how you want your research year to be and what they expect from you, essentially. And once you do that, they meet once a month. And once they meet, they'll let you know if you were approved for the research year or not. And once you're approved, they stop. You don't have to pay tuition or anything. And they basically take you out of the system essentially. So you're no longer a student until the following year.
Got it. Thank you guys for answering that. One of the other questions that a lot of people asked in the Google form was the finances and how you manage it. And I know a lot of people kind of touched on it, but I was just specifically wondering in terms of like scholarships. Are there scholarships for each research year, and did any of you apply for those?
So mine was paid. I think something that's really important to consider on a research year, and especially when applying for them, is, as we've kind of all touched on, there's some programs that are like former fellowships, and they're either endowed or they have a salary that you're given on an annual basis. And there's a lot of them that are unpaid. And I think that, as we've kind of all touched on, the way in which orthopedics is kind of heading because of step pass fail and the fact that people are always looking for metrics to have advantages against other people, attendings at various institutions, either for good or for good or bad intentions, are opening up lots of research positions that are just unpaid positions where they promise you a lot of productivity, they promise you a lot, but they might not necessarily be the ones to go to your corner when it comes time to go to the match. So I think that like you can find a lot of opportunities on OrthoGate, and there's a specific forum on OrthoGate where they post every single research year opportunity when you're looking for these various opportunities. But I would be wary to kind of like look for, as a lot of us have said, A, track record, B, going to a place where you're realistic to match, I think never hurts. And C, kind of, if it's unpaid, I'm not saying that it's a bad opportunity, but I'm saying that it's probably a little bit less established. And that's something that's very hard to kind of independently finance, especially being a medical student that's most likely in debt. So with regards to scholarships, I wouldn't call them scholarships so much as just categorize them into a binary of like paid and unpaid. And then beyond that, looking at how established these programs are and how well known your potential mentor is within their specific subspecialty, because that's key in terms of getting people to ultimately vouch for you when it comes time for the match.
Another question we got in the Google forum was, this is like a two-part question. Does where you do your research year have a big impact? I think Phoebe might have answered that already, but what if you do a research year somewhere that is reputable but does not have an ortho residency, only fellowship? So any thoughts on that?
I can kind of speak to this because my research year where I did it, they didn't have residents before. My second year was actually the first year that they had residents. And they only took residents from the associated medical school. So I think it was not something that I would do again. If I could go back, I would probably pick a place with residents, because I think it's not only that like you get to work with attendings and make connections with some of the residents, but it's also like seeing the next step. And I feel like they have been through the process, so they can guide you a little bit more, and meeting them is really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think one more question that was from the form that wasn't answered in the presentations. Is applying for a research year like fellowships is competitive process? Like, do you have to also like carefully curate your application because there's a lot of people applying for the same spot?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah. I was just asking, so when you're applying for the research year fellowships, how competitive is that process? Like, is it equally as competitive as like applying for residencies? Like, or like how much, you know what I mean? How much work do you have to put in because there's multiple people applying for the same spot?
I think that's largely variable. For reference, we're doing interviews for our fellowship right now. I think we got about 80 to 85 applications. We're interviewing 10 and we choose 2. And credentials are definitely like very good. And I would say most of them probably could have gone through and applied to ortho this year and probably been successful. Obviously, like I haven't gone through the match yet, but had I not done a research year, I would have felt fairly confident about my chances going into this match cycle. But still elected to take a research year. But I think that it's ultimately dependent on kind of when you're applying, where you're applying, and what you're applying for. As I said, if you're going to ultimately kind of opt to potentially do an unpaid position in a fellowship that's 1 year old with an attending that just established it, you are most likely going to be able to get that position. But whether or not that's going to ultimately fare well for you down the line is a completely different story. So another piece of advice I would definitely give people is that despite name, like being at Harvard, for example, or Rush, or any of those big names, if it doesn't seem like there's an established pipeline when it comes to matching at all, or at places that you're interested in, I would not opt to just go somewhere because of name, just because they have the name, because that's not really going to do very much for you despite networking. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if whoever is in charge of your fellowship is not going to vouch for you in a positive way and you somehow don't leave a good impression with them, then you probably just wasted a year and probably could have just applied independent of that.
That's so true. Like even at HSS, they were like, we have never taken someone who doesn't do an away rotation here, and we don't plan on doing it now. So I knew that, like, at the end of the day, if I chose not to do a research year there, regardless of me working there for a year, knowing basically the assistant program director, all that stuff, doesn't really matter if you don't do what they still want for that. They still have expectations for everyone that applies there.
Another question I had, it seemed like a common theme that a lot of you had talked to someone beforehand when you were deciding to take your research year, whether it was showing someone your current sort of application, like where you're at in terms of everything you've done so far, your credentials. I was wondering, like, who do you think is like the most important person to reach out to? I know some people say like reach out to student affairs. I think some of you said you reach out to your mentors first. Like, how would you suggest going about that process, and how early do you suggest going about that process?
I think you should, if you are considering taking a research year, reaching out as soon as possible is the most helpful, because then you could kind of tailor if you're gonna actually do the year or not. And that's something I regret doing. I wish I would have reached out in February and not gone through like step 2 and all of this and had to decide last minute. And I would find someone that you trust. That doesn't have to necessarily be an attending, or it can be a resident, but making sure that that person's going to tell you honestly, like what your application looks like and how you stand against the rest. I personally reached out to our program director because I had a good relationship with him, and I knew he was going to tell me candidly, like, do the residents like me? Like, how is my application as a whole? How are my clinical grades? How's my step 2? How is everything else that I'm involved in? So definitely reaching out early.
Anyone else have any more questions? All right, I think we can wrap up there. I want to say thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules. It was really much appreciated. I know that it's a stressful time for everyone here, so and applying to ortho is just a lot. So hearing your guys' experiences and unique perspectives is really, really helpful to us. So we're really thankful for that. So thank you guys, and have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all.